That brings us to item number 11, which is a presentation by Brian Moss, petitioner for Article 36 of the May 22nd, 2021 annual town meeting. I see, Brian, you're all set there. You got your screen share. And again, as I said previously, we are going to put on a timer for 10 minutes. So you have your 10 minutes. Floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. So I did rearrange the presentation a little bit from the Finance Committee one, if you did see that one, to kind of tailor a little bit more to the Board of Selectmen. So this presentation is fluoride's link to reduced IQ in children, Article 36. If you look at the petition, it's a very basic petition, and the actual impact would be Shrewsbury Town Meeting, if voted yes, the Shrewsbury Town Meeting would go on record as opposing the addition of fluoride to the town of Shrewsbury's drinking water supply in order to stop exposing vulnerable subpopulations such as pregnant women to fluoridated water due to the unreasonable risk it poses to their child's brain without any benefit to their child's teeth. And I did highlight a couple of things because I just wanted to keep that in mind as I go through this presentation, that you might hear it's safe and effective, but if you're going to put it in the water, it has to be safe and effective for all populations. And so I'm concentrating on that. If it's not safe and effective for any subpopulation, then it needs to come out of the water. So pregnant woman is the focus. And I do have the unreasonable risk portion, which I will present to you, as well as the no benefit to the teeth as well. So you'll probably remember back in 2019, I did bring this forward to the Board of Selectmen as your role as water commissioners. In 2019, a study came out in the Journal of, it was a U.S. funded study that was peer reviewed, published in the Journal of American Medical Association Pediatrics, and there was actually that showed a link to optimally fluoridated water during pregnancy, drinking optimally fluoridated water during pregnancy to lowered IQ in children. When it was published, there was a actual podcast, which was unprecedented by the editors-in-chief of this prestigious journal. And I'm going to just paraphrase it. You have this, you can look at this later, but pretty much they were saying that they were taught in medical school is it's completely safe, and anybody trying to take it out of the water is nuts. It's the best thing that's ever happened in dental health. So you hear all these things, these generalized statements, but when they saw the study, they were like, what the hell? Because the science wasn't adding up to what they heard throughout their residencies. A couple other things they mentioned during the 12-minute podcast was that the effect on IQ was the same effect size on par with lead. So this is not a small effect size, it's the same effect size as lead. And what was interesting is even at the end, they were asking each other, what would you do if new mothers came into their doctor's offices and asked as a pediatrician what to do? The editor-in-chief said, I think I would advise them to drink bottled water or filtered water because it's not a particularly odious thing to do and potentially does reduce the risk. And in an article that's below that, it was very interesting because he said the question that needs to be asked to every pediatrician, scientist, and epidemiologist is what they're going to tell pregnant women. And the editor-in-chief said, who says he will advise his pregnant friends and family to avoid fluoridated water. We can't tell them to wait years for another study. They have to decide what to tell their patients now. So what he's saying is that we have these studies. If you're going to wait, these studies take years, multi-year, decades of data. If you're going to wait, you have to wait longer. So I just wanted to point that out. And if you remember, I kind of had come forward to ask the water commissioners to send a notice out to the town, notifying the pregnant woman of these studies. So it would be informed consent. They would be informed of the risk, and they could make their choice on whether to drink the water. If the board did direct me to go to the Board of Health, so what I did do is I went to the Board of Health. I brought the same thing to provide the notice. They declined to provide that notice, but said they would keep their eye on it. I did go back to them again and said, well, I'm providing studies that show a risk, but can you show me the safety science? That should be easy to do. Please, we have studies now. Please show me the science that shows that it's safe. And ask them to actually ask the Mass Department of Public Health and the Worcester Department of Health to do that. They actually voted not to do that. So they refused to actually go and ask for the safety studies that would put this to bed, and told me to go do it. So that's why they kind of put it to me and said, you can go ask if you want. So what's interesting is that this leads us to this federal trial that's come up. And I didn't have to go ask because all of the information came out under oath by the CDC and EPA itself under deposition, which means an official record under oath, which is on the court record. So this trial actually started with Tosca, which TSCR allows the EPA to prohibit a particular use of a chemical that presents an unreasonable risk to the general public or susceptible subpopulation. You can see I'm talking the same language, which would include somebody like pregnant women. So there was actually a petition brought to the EPA on that subject. The EPA declined the petition, and so it ended up in court. So what ended up in the court is this has been since 2016. So this has been going along and for a while. And what you can see is that through the depositions and through the court record during this 2-week trial, a lot came out. And this is actually my whereas clauses, which is where the evidence is based. You'll see that each statement that I make is backed up by evidence from the CDC and the EPA itself. So I'm going to go through each one of these. I'm going to start with the evidence of the risk of harm. So the EPA admitted that fluoride passes through the placenta and gets into the fetal brain. That's an undisputed fact. There's also a lot of talk about me cherry picking this data and studies, but that's not the case. I'm not cherry picking this. The EPA itself, this is an actual court document where the court specifically says, in particular, the studies arising out of the Merck element birth cohorts were all published after the EPA had denied the plaintiff's petition back in 2016. That's the same time that I had brought my last petition. This was after that. So all of these studies arising out of these birth cohorts after the last time I brought this to town meeting. And this lawsuit had already been filed. Importantly, even the EPA acknowledges that these studies are the highest quality, most reliable studies to date on the subject. And you can see the court document references all of the specific testimony and or undisputed facts. For example, you'll see even at the end there, you'll see the last bullet, Dr. Chang, which was representing the EPA, identified the Bahash, Green, and Till studies as the most rigorous from a methodology standpoint. This is Judge Chen who's presiding over the federal trial, and I just want to read what he has to say. So much has changed since the petition was filed. 2 significant series of studies, respective cohort studies, which everybody agrees is the best methodology. Everybody agrees that were rigorous studies, and everybody agrees that these studies would be part of the best available scientific science. So you can see this is in the court record. He is saying everybody agrees, meaning the EPA, who's a defendant, and the plaintiffs, and they all showed adverse effects. These are the NIH, National Institutes of Health, funded Merck element birth cohort studies that they are referring to in those court documents. They've all happened since the last petition. The one on the upper right was the one that came out that kind of repeated. I think it was good guidance that was given by the selectmen at one point in time, or water commissioners, saying, there's a certain bar you have to reach with peer-reviewed science. The 2019 study actually repeated the 2017 study. And then there's been a study since then in 2020 showing a link of fluoride exposure and the effect, when it's in urethra with pregnant women, effect on children as well as infants. EPA itself, their chief scientist on fluoride, actually said, and I'm not going to read the statement, but that these studies are need to reassess current safety standards for fluoride. This is the EPA saying this, not me. So then you get to the CDC. Well, the CDC admitted a bunch of things. They had the oral health director under deposition. He said, and these are directly related to the statements in my petition. He says, we have not found evidence that shows benefit to the child if community water fluoridation or some other form of fluoride is ingested by the mother. So when they say it's effective, it's not effective they have no evidence to say it's effective for the same vulnerable subpopulation that I'm talking about. Yeah, the next one, this one's on infants. The CDC is not aware of any evidence demonstrating benefits from the consumption of fluoridated drinking water during the first 6 months of life. He answered, we are not aware of any evidence. So when you hear safe and effective, he is representing the CDC as a whole. They do not have this evidence for the fetus and the infant. And then this is the safe dose. They don't even have the safe dose for fluoride. So CDC does not have any data, meaning science studies, anything, on the tolerable upper fluoride intake for neurotoxic effects on children. Right? He answered. Then we have, I just want to say that the person, I only have less than a minute left, but the director of the NIH's National Toxicity Program for 10 years, accolades from the current director, wrote an op-ed when she left in 2019. It's time to protect kids' developing brains from fluoride. Mounting evidence suggests fluoride may be hampering brain development and reducing kids' IQ. The U.S. needs to rethink this exposure for pregnant women and children. She was the director of the NTP and a National Institute of Environmental Scientists for the NIH. She was head of the National Toxicology Program, which I have underneath here, which they're actually waiting for because it does some consolidation of data. But in their draft conclusion, it says, when considering all the evidence, NTP concludes that fluoride is presumed to be a cognitive neurotoxic hazard to humans.
Brian, we're at 10 minutes.
Phew, I got it done. So now, definitely as water commissioners, I hope you have a lot of questions for me. A lot has changed. This is a lot of new information. So I'm just hoping you have some questions for me as your role of water commissioners. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Mr. Moss?
Madam Chair.
Mr. DiPaolo.
Mr. Moss, thank you for that presentation. I have a couple of questions. This trial that you keep referring to, has it completed, and has there been a verdict, a judgment?
That's a great question. Actually, the TSCA law allows this one judge, that Judge Chen, he could rule either way and have the fate of all fluoridation decided by his vote. If he votes to have it banned, it would be banned. If he votes not to, then it would not. He is actually, he's actually following the science. And so what he did is you can look at that abeyance order. I have a link. He put it in abeyance, which means he says, I'm not going to rule on this. And he chastised the two sides. He went to the plaintiffs and said, I don't think you have good enough standing. So I might rule against you because you don't have good enough standing. And then he went to the EPA and said, this is a lot of great science, and you need to reconsider the science since their petition, because this is all in the court documents. So they have not.
So, but excuse me.
Yep.
Did he make a decision?
He did not yet. No.
So we don't know what the outcome of this is going to be, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I just got to ask, I guess it's kind of a rhetorical question, because you brought up this IQ thing before. So if we were to accept your argument that you're saying these studies demonstrated, and you can say, well, these are the facts, that's what they demonstrated. Are you telling me that every person who grew up in town on fluoridated water has a lower IQ because they had fluoride in the water? Everybody who grew up in town? Is that your contention?
So not my contention, but what they're saying, when they looked at these studies, and they actually looked at it, they found that there's on average a five IQ point loss for those that were, for pregnant women that intook fluoride levels on par with people drinking fluoridated water. Now,
okay, so essentially, you're saying that they're saying that the average person who grew up in town, whose mother was pregnant, drank fluoridated water in Shrewsbury, has an average of a 5-point lower IQ than surrounding towns that don't have it?
that would be correct. And you might not, they do an interesting, if you look at that op-ed, that if there's a link in that op-ed that the former NTP director did, if you look at the video, it describes how you won't notice 5 IQ points because of the bell curve. If you take the bell curve and move it 5 IQ points to the left, if we're all say in the middle of that bell curve, you're not going to notice it. But if the number of disabled children goes up significantly, and the gifted children go down significantly. And as you do that for every chemical, such as lead, you move it to the left. For fluoride, you move it to the left. So there's a good explanation on that. Yes.
Okay. I'm not completely sure I agree with that. I have one other question. So this whole fluoride thing and its benefit to tooth decay started with research by a dentist who noticed people had stained teeth in certain parts of the country. And I think, if I remember right, I got to go back and look. In Colorado, I think, they had stained teeth but no cavities, or very, very few. So I guess my question is, so what do all the people do around the country who have fluoride naturally occurring in their water do? It's one thing to say to take it out if you're adding it. What do places do that have naturally occurring fluoride, which a lot of places do?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Probably the easiest way to look at that would be China. So China has high, and China and India both have high levels of fluoride in their groundwater. And so if you remember, some of the studies originally came out of China when I started talking this back in 2015, because they see negative effects there because their fluoride levels are higher. I mean, if it's their, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I may be wrong, but it's, in the parts per million, like 4 parts per million. They probably have those levels. They're not in the 1 parts per million that we have. And so they are seeing that. In the US, I think, like, for example, I think we asked what our natural level is, and the former head of the water had said that it was, I think, 0.1 naturally here. So we're actually raising it up to, we were raising it to 1 part per million from 1.1. So we went 0.1 to 1, and then we lowered it to 0.7 a couple of years ago.
Right.
But most places don't have in the US a lot of the high levels that you'll see that they need to actually remove it, because it's really hard to remove. It's as hard as PFAS, right? You got to get reverse osmosis to get it out.
Okay. Can you just one last question? I'm not sure we're ever going to agree on this, but I'd like to do more research. The transcript of the trial and the depositions. Where can I find that? I know it's got to be out there somewhere, because do you have the whole transcript of the trial to date and the depositions?
I do not, because you're not allowed to record the Zooms. You actually have to order a full transcript and pay for it. I don't forget how much it is. I think it's a lot. I do not have access to that. I do have access to where I got my information from is on the plaintiff side. They had access to the full transcript. So I did do the excerpts from the transcripts that they gave. But I would say that, I mean, they do have videos too. So I do have the video, some of the video snippets where you could see it. But it is a good question, where I was hoping I had presented this information to the Board of Health. And my real goal before I came to town meeting was I was just hopeful that if I brought it forward, I want it to be checked. I want it to be challenged. But when I asked them, are you going to take any action on this? I'm glad, Selectman DePaul, that you're asking this question, is if they could go seek that information or see, from these regulatory bodies, but nobody's going to actually check, and I'd be more than happy if people did, because I'm confident that this is the correct information.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's where I kind of came to town meeting again, because what do I do with all this? I think I've made some hurdles where I think everybody, rightfully so, it gave some hurdles. Let's make sure it's U.S. funded studies. Let's make sure it's repeated. Let's make sure it's CDC and EPA saying stuff. So the court record will allow us to look at that. But nobody, the Board of Health won't take it forward. They say they're taking no action on this. So that's why I felt I had to take it.
So we don't, unless sounds like we have to pay a lot of money to get the transcripts. All that, the information that you got is from the depositions in the trial, but you don't have the full transcript. So all you're getting is the information from the plaintiff side, or their perspective. Is that true?
Well, what I could do, I think that's a great question, Mo, right? Excuse me, Selectman DePaul.
Call me Mo, it's okay.
It's a great question, Mo, because at first I was getting that information, but I did track down the abeyance order, which is in this presentation. The link is there. You can look at it afterwards. If you go to that link, what happened was when the 2-week trial was over, unfortunately, we don't have the videos because those won't be released till the trial's done. But the abeyance order sums it up. The judge spends the first couple of pages describing the standing issues of the plaintiffs, but then spends the other half of the document talking about the serious evidence, the effects on infants and, the lower IQ and these studies, and references the studies, references the EPA's actual where they came from in the deposition. So where I said it, this is from the deposition, that document actually has a really good reference. I could actually, am I still presenting? I could just show you real quick the slide.
But right, but we don't know what type of follow-up questions or any other stuff came up after those questions. So without the full transcript, I'm like reading a cliff note of it. And
Well,
I'm not saying that's your fault. It's just not all available. So, I mean, I really, I have as much interest in this as you, but for a different reason. But I'd like to be able to see the complete, and it's not on you to provide it, but I'd like to see the complete transcript to see what the full discussion was. I think getting excerpts from a trial, and I'm not a lawyer, but to me, that's kind of like watching TV news and then picking out what they want, and we're not getting the yeah but. So in any event, I'll try to find it. I look forward to more dialogue with you, and I'm going to try to look up that information that you said's new since the last time, and see if my opinion changes based on that. But I thank you for your research, and I look forward to discussing with you further. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Samia?
just one quick comment. Well, we can try to look at Pacer just to see the docket and what's filed. And Brian, if we can find it, would share it. But that's something we can try to do offline. The quick question. So how many communities in the Commonwealth have fluoridate the water right now? I saw one stat from a few years ago. It said 140, but do you know how many communities?
Off the top of my head, I don't. I have that information, but not off the top of my head. But I would say it's mostly towards Western Mass is less so. And if you look, if I can tell you about our surrounding area, which is actually probably the most relevant information, would say let's look at our Central Mass Health Alliance, right? Mm-hmm. So Central Mass Health Alliance, which is the one we're in, includes towns such as Grafton, which does not fluoridate its water, and there's I believe a majority do not. So Worcester does not fluoridate its water. Grafton does not. I don't want to mistake directly in front of me, but I can provide that most do not. Hopkinton doesn't. They're not in our Central Mass Health Alliance. But if you look at our area, there really is only, I think, Westboro, Northboro. Northboro has to be because it's part of they get the water from the state, whatever that is. So they have no choice. Westboro has a choice, but most of the others do not. Some participate in the mouth rinse, some do not. But for the most part, most of this area is not fluoridated. We're a minority, I would say.
I guess just a question, and it relates to what Mo had asked too. Wouldn't it be, if the decrease in IQ, the 5 points, wouldn't it resonate or be more profound even community by community? So if we've been adding fluoride to our water since what, 53, and other communities who haven't, wouldn't that be noticeable? Wouldn't you have through time such a distinct difference that it would be apparent when you compare communities? Like 5 points is something, right? So wouldn't you have trends? That's what I'm grappling with. I'm not questioning the data points. It just, to me, would follow that these communities that you're talking about that do not and that do, through time you'd see that. I guess why don't you think we see that?
Yeah, I can address that if you want. That's probably one of the best questions, because everybody will say, well, look at us. And I'll just show you the slides. You'll have this data. I can forward it right afterwards. But where you want to look is this. Now, I can only give you what I can. This is this Linda Birnbaum, you can see here, she was the director in the NIH, and I can show you her retirement letter from the current NIH director praising her service at the NIH. She was a director most recently there while this stuff has been going on. She was there at the NTP while this research was going on fluoride. She left. Now she's retired. So you get, is that a good source? I believe it's a good source. I mean, it's as good as you're going to get. She actually wrote the op-ed with Till and Lamphere. Well, these two are the authors of the birth cohort studies that the EPA said is the best studies on the subject. So we're not talking about a newspaper article somewhere. I know in the past I've brought those, here's a Newsweek article. So rightfully so that I didn't cross the bar at that point. What I'm trying to do is show you that the tide is turning, where you have Bruce Lamphere. Not only is he part of the studies that the EPA say is the best, but he is actually if you look at his in the court documents, they actually testified in the court. So as some of the leading experts, he actually in his resume does stuff for the EPA for other things. So he was actually cited as in his pooled analysis of blood lead and IQ. And it was the critical study upon which the EPA based the current national air standard for lead. So these people are not just reporters writing, they're writing this op-ed. In that op-ed, sorry, long story short, in that op-ed, they address your, Selectman Samia, your exact question. And the video is put out by Lamphere, and Lamphere is the one who did the studies that the EPA say are the best. And they put together this video. If you click this, go to this link on environmental health, watch that video. I think they'll describe some of it in the text, but if you watch it, it shows the bell curve and how you won't notice it, but it has a huge impact when you think 3/4 of the United States is fluoridated. So when you take that and you move the bell curve 5 IQ points, it's the two tail ends you get. There's not many gifted, and the amount of gifted you lose is a lot. Where people go and their IQ goes below to become disabled is a lot. So that's what we're saying, that we're not going to tell from ourselves that, or, somebody living in Grafton, you're not going to tell if they have, that's too small to tell in that sense. But from a population wide, it's a huge impact. And that's why it's so important, especially with all the other chemicals. We've talked about chromium in the water, PFAS chemicals, and this one. And those have effects. Now they're below the levels, of concern, but we've notified pregnant women in examples with PFAS. No, so that in case something changes in the future, I think it's we'll see from these studies and the 5 IQ points, it's on par with lead. I mean, the editor of the JAMA Pediatrics is there. If we put lead in the water.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for your presentation, and I'll look deeper into the information. It's been a while since I've looked at some of this, so I look forward to getting back into it. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments for Brian?
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. Thanks again.
Thank you. And then the last article that we have is Article 36. That was brought by Mr. Moss. We had a presentation through us. It relates to adopting a resolution opposing the addition of fluoride to the town of Shrewsbury's drinking water supply. And then he has recitals there in the resolution itself that the town goes on record as opposing the addition of fluoride to the drinking water supply, and then talks about potential exposure to vulnerable subpopulations. So we did, as well, like we did with Article 34, wanted some time to think about it and wanted to see now where members of the board are with Article 36. Mrs. Cassavant?
So Mr. Samia, as usual, I am in favor of removing the fluoride from the drinking water and not adding it. It's been a long-standing stance of mine that I just believe that there are opportunities for people to obtain fluoride in other ways, and that fluoridating the water and making everyone opt in is not the direction that I think we should be going in.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. DiPaolo.
Mr. Chairman, I will hold my long-standing opposition to this article. The difference of opinions on at least within our town of what the science is, but what I have seen and what I have read even recently, and got information from the head of water at NIH, or EPA, I'm sorry, I can't remember which one it was. My position hasn't changed. And I would just say that a lot of what the basis of this new petition is based on information coming out of a trial about the subject that has not been completed and that no one has seen, and the proponent has not seen. the entire transcript. Yeah, the Canadian study's out there, but if the science was clear, I would say yes. Everything that I've read, I think it's still safe, and I think there's a benefit to it. So obviously, I would vote not to recommend this article.
Any other comments? Mrs. Flynn.
I haven't seen anything in the petition or the presentations that validate that it is unsafe to have fluoride in our water. I think the biggest gap for me is the demand from the community. You know, personal feelings aside, it does not seem like there's an overwhelming demand to remove the fluoride from our water. And I would expect to maybe have a little bit more community input on what their preferences are regarding this.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I simply have not been convinced that it's time to make a change. We've heard one individual advocate very zealously for its removal. However, there is a lot of other science out there as well from many medical associations, et cetera. I don't believe our Board of Health has taken a position opposing the introduction of fluoride into the municipal water supply. So I am not in favor of recommending this article.
Well, thank you. So I've thought a lot about this article. I had the opportunity pre-COVID to meet with people about their concerns about fluoride. You know, I think there's sort of two tracks to this. The first is whether it's a neurotoxin, and you look at the Canadian study and the results that are there, and then you look at the CDC and World Health Organization and NIH study in 2017, and the information, even when they point to that study, says, yeah, it's a study, but, and then you read into the acknowledgement of results, but then interpretation of what they mean. I haven't seen anything convincing that the Canadian study is more than that it's, say, a setting or indicative of a trend. It is a test. I know there was one in Mexico as well. I guess part of it's anecdotal evidence that if you look at this communities in Massachusetts, it was 140. It's probably give or take some now. That maybe I'm oversimplifying, but where the bell curve would be, and you'd have communities that fluoridate their water, that I think there'd be a difference between those communities that have had longstanding introduction of fluoride into the water. So the medical piece, you know, the final thing was that I went to healthcare professionals around here, a longstanding dentist who was one of the best in the business, and I got his thoughts, and he explained the difference even of having patients from, say, Worcester or Shrewsbury, and the positive impact that it had not only on their oral health, but also their physical health. So the science piece, not saying that there are studies that are out there that don't say otherwise, but that I don't think, and I tend to agree that the science there, I haven't been convinced otherwise yet, given all these organizations. I think the second prong of the argument is what I thought long and hard about. Is it something we want in our water? That's a different question. You know, right now where I am, I'm still in favor of fluoride in water, but this was a close one for me, but it was not the first prong, it was the second prong. I do think that there are opportunities for people to have good dental hygiene that there weren't, say, in 1945 when in Michigan it was introduced. But I'm not there yet. So I would, at this point, also be in the camp of not recommending, but I appreciate the article brought before us. I just haven't seen the science, but the second prong I thought long and hard about, Is it something that I want in our water or we want in our water? And it was a lot closer for me, but at this point, I still would keep it in. So I think we've heard any other comments, but I think we know where we stand at this point. I'd entertain a motion on Article 36.
Mr. Chairman, I move the board not recommend Article 36.
Second,
Having been moved and seconded, a roll call vote is required. Mr. LeBeau.
Aye.
aye.
Mrs. Cassavant.
No.
Mrs. Flynn.
Aye.
Mr. Samia, I vote not to motion not to recommend passes 4-1. So thank you. Thanks for your feedback on that. Now we go